Hello everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, the Genie Vlogger, and welcome back to another Professional Genealogist Reacts. On today's video, I will be reacting to the decline of 23andMe, What Happened by Company Man. Now this is a channel I am familiar with. I've seen a bunch of Company Man's videos over the years. Very interesting to me being able to see, what happens in the history of a company and the different things that help make a company rise and fall and all of that. And when I saw this video, I watched through it because I figured this was going to be one I should check out first to make sure it's something I could talk about. And there was a lot of stuff where I thought I could add on a whole lot to it, especially just in my thoughts of 23andMe versus the other DNA companies that kind of rule the market. Those mainly being Ancestry, Family Tree DNA, and MyHeritage, with Living DNA being kind of a close fourth sort of in there. But with all that said, let's just jump into the video.
23andMe provides a cool service. You spit in a tube, send it off to them, and amazingly, they can use that saliva to generate all these personalized reports. I'm talking about ancestry, ethnicity, potential health risks. You can truly learn a lot about yourself by doing it. I know that this might all seem kind of straightforward and simple, but these tests have been made possible through years of genetic research, mainly the Human Genome Project. It was a massive undertaking. Starting in 1990, it took over a decade and billions of dollars to map out the sequence of the human genome. Now, I am by no means a biologist or geneticist, but to my understanding, that project made it possible for a person to have their DNA sequenced, but it was very expensive and not really accessible to most people. For example, Steve Jobs reportedly had it done for the price of $100,000 in hopes that it would help guide him toward more personally effective drugs and treatments for his cancer.
And in my understanding, back in the early days of trying to get the whole genome sequence and all of that, it wasn't even spit tests and all of that, it was actual blood tests. And I remember hearing Henry Louis Gates Jr. speak about his experience doing DNA testing, and he talked about the first time he went to go do a DNA test and they had to take blood, and if I remember correctly, he even said that kind of like they were screwing up and trying to take it or something. But the ability to do it as a spit test came a little bit later. I don't know the true exact history with that of when it switched over or if they were going at the exact same time, but I know a lot of people who were getting their DNA tested in the 90s and early 2000s were largely doing blood tests.
In the following years, further advancements allowed for more efficient genotyping as opposed to full-on sequencing, bringing the cost down significantly and leading to the foundation of 23andMe. That right there is a complicated name. The 23 refers to the pairs of chromosomes inside of our DNA. The "and" part is actually DNA spelled backwards, and the "me" part refers to the individual's connection to it.
So the whole thing about the "and" being DNA backwards, that was actually something a bunch of people in my Discord server were talking about, and I know that's not something I had ever heard before, and I didn't really look into it after I first saw the video, but I remember when I saw people talking about it in my Discord server, everyone basically said, when did that happen? So I'm kind of curious if there was actual record of that or if this was just kind of assumption on Company Man's part. But that is kind of interesting. I didn't even kind of realize that. But yeah, 23andMe and is DNA backwards. So that is kind of funny.
Plus, it rhymes. So overall, I would say a pretty solid name. The company was started by 3 people, the most significant one being Ann Wojcicki, who would go on to become CEO, chairman of the board, and 49% owner. Shortly after founding 23andMe, she married Sergey Brin, who was one of the co-founders of Google, that early on invested millions of dollars in her company. In late 2007, 23andMe started offering their famous DNA testing kits directly to consumers for $999, a comparatively reasonable price for the time, and there was a lot of hype around it, so much so that Time magazine named it the #1 invention of the year.
When this came out, it was right before I got super into genealogy, so the way that I like to describe my experience with genealogy was 2009, my senior year in college at the University of Pittsburgh. I started to find my actual cousins all around the world, and that was when I became truly obsessed with genealogy. Before that, I would kind of dabble here and there. And at that time, from what I remember, and I could be wrong, the biggest competition that 23andMe had was Family Tree DNA. But I don't know when Family Tree DNA rolled out their autosomal DNA testing, which is what 23andMe is. So when we talk about DNA testing, there are three main tests that we talk about. There's the autosomal DNA test, there's the Y chromosome DNA test, and then there's the mitochondrial DNA test. So the autosomal DNA test, that's what you basically get with 23andMe, that's what you get with Ancestry, that's what you get with the Family Finder test at Family Tree DNA, and that's what you get with the MyHeritage DNA test. Now, granted, all of these tests are also testing parts of the Y chromosome and parts of the mitochondrial DNA, but not all of these tests are giving information about it. Now, 23andMe did give information on the Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA. So the Y chromosome being the chromosome that men inherit from their fathers, so we can trace it back up the pure paternal line, and it tells us things thousands upon thousands of years back. The mitochondrial DNA is similar in that a child inherits their mitochondrial DNA from their mother. So you can trace that up a purely maternal line thousands and thousands of years back. But the difference of what 23andMe gave for that information versus Family Tree DNA was a major difference. With 23andMe, they only gave you a general haplogroup. So what that meant is that if you had your DNA tested 23andMe and you're a man, you would see your paternal haplogroup is what they'd call it, and that would show you about where your paternal line traces maybe 2,000, 3,000 years back, and then keep going further. And then for the maternal, kind of the same thing. Whereas with Family Tree DNA, it was giving you a haplogroup, but it was also giving you matches on those, both your Y chromosome and your mitochondrial DNA. So that meant that when you had DNA matches through a Y chromosome, you knew that if you trace up your father's line and that other person's father's line, that is exactly where you would find the connection, and that's why you share that DNA. So when 23andMe came out, I don't know if Family Tree DNA had come out with their Family Finder stuff yet, because Family Tree DNA's original focus was just the Y DNA. And I need to learn my history a lot better about kind of the 2000 aughts with DNA testing, because I first DNA tested in 2013, and that was with Family Tree DNA, which at that point the industry had grown a lot and it was much more common to do DNA testing and it was much cheaper. But a major force that was pushing behind and supporting 23andMe at that time, from my experience, was the genealogy community. And the reason for that is largely because the genealogy community was the one that pushed to have the most people tested. Now, that is my opinion based on my experience, and I could be wrong on that because I'm not going off of numbers. I'm just going off of my experience of everyone that I saw testing on 23andMe. They were either getting it as a general fun sort of thing, but largely the largest groups of people were coming from genealogists getting their family members to test. So the people that were getting tested were largely being pushed by genealogists.
Time progressed, 23andMe attracted more customers, became more valuable, and continued to be praised from seemingly every direction. Notably, it was on CNBC's Disruptor 50 list 4 times in a row starting in 2016, and 23andMe slowly became a household name as it continued to attract investors.
In the genealogy community by 2016, 2018, I think most people basically viewed the top 2 DNA companies, DNA testing companies, being Ancestry DNA and then 23andMe coming in as a second. So it was definitely really major force within that field, but I feel like things started to go somewhat downhill just around that time, maybe a little bit earlier, middle 2010s, because they started to do a lot that at least pushed the genealogy community away, which was a major force in getting people to test on 23andMe, and a lot of people started not to suggest 23andMe anymore.
2021, the company hit its peak valuation on the stock market of around $6 billion. According to Forbes, Ann Wojcicki officially became a billionaire that year, and things have really taken a turn from that point. Ann Wojcicki has been pushing to take it private again, so it doesn't have to worry about all the short-term pressure from investors on the market, and that has led to everyone resigning from the board of directors, essentially saying that they weren't clear about the direction of the company. And one of those directors, by the way, was the current CEO of YouTube. She expressed how she was surprised and disappointed at the decision. So I think it's clear that things are falling apart. The company is quickly running out of money, and it is looking like they will be forced into some sort of sale or bankruptcy or something drastic to survive. There's so much happening here. So in this video, I want to talk about why everything has gone so bad for what what used to be one of the most promising companies out there.
And what he just mentioned about them selling the company, there's a lot of genealogists like myself who hope that whoever buys the company at least makes the matching database still available in some way, whether it be they still keep the 23andMe website up and running, or if they kind of sell that database maybe to another company to use, because while 23andMe, the database is a big part of it, the matching database part is something that is very useful genealogically, so a lot of people would want it. But I think the most likely scenario is that if it does get bought, it'll probably be bought by some sort of pharmaceutical company or some really, really, really large, medical-based company, and they have way, way, way more money than a lot of these, DNA companies do, I think. Well, at least the ones that aren't necessarily really largely corporate owned, like Ancestry, because they kind of have a backer behind them that has a lot of money.
First reason behind the decline is straightforward, but failing to turn a profit. That is why they're in so much trouble right now and running out of money. The company is spending way more than it is making. The reasons behind this are going to be explained better as I continue through the rest of the list,
And this is something where I wanted to put my opinion in. I don't remember everything he says, so I may be saying things ahead of time, but basically from my standpoint, a big reason why they weren't profitable, because once you did the DNA test, there really wasn't much to do after that you would want to buy from them. You had your DNA information, and at one point, I don't remember exactly when, they rolled out what was known as 23 Plus, which was basically like this $10 a month membership or something like that. I don't remember the exact cost, but it put some certain tools and different, things behind that extra paywall. But for a lot of people, it wasn't worthwhile to do that. So I think very few people did that. And even more, it pushed a lot of people away, because especially a lot of people in the genealogy community who would have been the ones to want to pay for some sort of membership if they had something worthwhile, they would have been the ones to do it. But instead, a lot of genealogists had already been having a lot of issues with 23andMe, because 23andMe had basically said at some point, our focus is the medical side of DNA testing, and the genealogy side is just kind of a little extra fun thing. And slowly they did various things throughout the years that really annoyed people, and the 23andMe Plus was a big part of that I know pushed a lot of people away from suggesting it anymore as the main place to test, and instead a lot of people were saying just Ancestry. Because before, it used to be everyone would say, well, either Ancestry or 23andMe, because you can download the raw data and upload the data to most of the other websites, but 23andMe and Ancestry DNA did not allow uploads. But where you have a difference between 23andMe and a lot of the other companies is they had things that allowed either customers to want to pay for more memberships after they did the DNA test, or they had a whole different part of their business that supplemented them greatly. Now, with 23andMe, I think they made a lot of their money by selling data, which is one of the things that I think pushed a lot of people away from 23andMe as well, is that they knew that 23andMe was selling data. So why would they want to give their DNA data to the company that they know was doing that? Granted, you had to consent to do that, and I didn't consent to it, and I've been getting emails all the time that's like, you should consent to this, you should consent to this. But it still was something that a lot of people were like, no, thank you. But then look at companies like Ancestry and MyHeritage, who both were in the game of genealogy before DNA testing. They added DNA testing as another thing, so that kind of gave them an edge. But basically, people DNA test, and then you can have a membership on Ancestry and MyHeritage, which then gives you access to all of these records. They're, big databases, both of them having over billions and billions of records. And then they also had extra tools that you could get by doing the membership in your DNA. So, the big thing right now is Ancestry has that side view comparison, and they have the shared matches comparison. And then with MyHeritage, they have the theory of family relativity, and they have the auto cluster and a few other things. So the DNA tests for those companies are really just a way to lead in, funnel more customers to them. Whereas with 23andMe, that's it, is the DNA test. Now, family tree DNA is kind of similar to 23andMe in that, you do the DNA test and there's not much to do afterwards. Granted, they have 3 different DNA tests you can do: the autosomal, the Y-DNA, and the mitochondrial DNA. But beyond that, there's not much you can really pay for that is something that a lot of people would want to keep going. But Family Tree DNA is owned by a company called Gene by Gene, which has a whole separate private lab that does all sorts of other work, including doing a lot of the DNA testing for forensics. And then the forensic side of things is another place where Family Tree DNA is also making money, generating their revenue. So all of these other companies have a lot of things going on for them beyond the DNA testing, where for 23andMe, it's basically just the DNA testing and then selling the DNA test data. So in my opinion, I think that's one of the big things that really made it not so profitable. Now, the only other main DNA test that I didn't discuss is Living DNA, which I really don't know their business model that well. It's the site of the main 5 that I've used the least. I think that one's going to be an interesting one to see how much it grows, because it's kind of always just been like the younger brother of all the other 4 main ones. So let me know what you think. If you think that Living DNA kind of has a similar issue to 23andMe, where all they're doing is really selling DNA tests, or do they have something more to their business model? Because that's something I'm going to need to look into. But let's continue.
Right away, I want to make it clear that 23andMe has never been profitable and is losing more money right now than ever before. I should point out that more than half of their most recent loss comes from a goodwill impairment, which is also still a bad sign. In the beginning, when they charged almost $1,000 for the kit, even though it was comparatively cheaper than what many others were paying in the past, it was still a lot of money. Most people simply weren't willing to pay that much, so they gradually reduced that price all the way down to $99, attracting over 15 million customers throughout its lifetime while losing money through all of it.
I want to say I remember the $99 DNA tests, not just 23andMe, but the other ones as well. Those coming out, kind of mid 2010s-ish and starting to get popular. And now things are so cheap that you can often get DNA tests on sale for, $30 a DNA kit. And you can go and, get them on sale almost all the time throughout the year. They sell them all over the place. I think you can even buy 23andMe kits at like Walgreens or Amazon and other places like that. And we've seen that price drop happen with a lot of the other DNA testing as well, with the Y chromosome testing, the mitochondrial DNA testing, and even whole genome sequencing, which is sequencing your entire genome. So your autosomal DNA, your mitochondrial DNA, your Y chromosome, and even more, it's doing the whole genome pretty much. So when you do one of these tests like 23andMe, it's testing about 700,000 SNP markers. So SNPs being called single nucleotide polymorphisms, but that's just a bunch of fancy jargon that basically stands for specific spots on the DNA where we're looking for if there's a difference from that between the standard DNA. And so 23andMe is testing 700,000 of these SNPs, whereas when you do the whole genome sequencing, it's testing way more, because you have way more than 700,000 different markers of DNA. But whole genome sequencing used to be really expensive, and nowadays you can get whole genome sequence tests for I think as low as $100. But I think most of the best ones are about 200 or 300 for the standard one, which I know I did the Nebula whole genome sequence test. There's also the Dante test, and then there's some other companies out there as well that I'm not quite as familiar with.
Up on the list, a lot of the troubles stem from the fact that 23andMe has had a lot of difficulty maintaining their customers. Let me know if this has been the case for you, but I suspect that most people are excited to take their test, receive the results, learn everything about their genetics, but once that happens, you don't really want anything to do with them.
That's only true for everyone outside of the genealogy community, and one of the reasons why, in my opinion, 23andMe should have tried to cater much more to the genealogy community, because we're the ones who get people to DNA test more than anybody else. But even more, once we get the DNA results, unlike what Company Man is saying here, which I can understand because he's probably not thinking from a genealogy standpoint, but we're the ones who we care about the data, because we can use the DNA matches from the site to constantly help expand our family tree. And especially as new people test, some new cousin that tests may be the secret to unlock an entire side of your family. And this constantly has happened for me over the years since I've tested since 2013. So my first test was 2013 with Family Tree DNA. I did what they called back then the comprehensive genome package, I guess, or something like that. Basically, it was the autosomal DNA test, a Y chromosome test that tested 67 markers, not SNPs, but STRs. I'm not going to get into the specifics of it. And then testing all of the regions of my mitochondrial DNA. So that's why they called it the comprehensive genome, because it wasn't your whole genome, but it was the comprehensive thing. And so I did that in 2013, and that was my first leap into genetic genealogy. And within about a year or two of that, I was already solving tons and tons of problems within my own tree, but also having, getting other people tested. I was helping others with their DNA tests to solve that stuff as well. So what Company Man is saying here, I think, is true for most of the consumers that are paying for the 23andMe kit. And this also leads me to one of the issues that 23andMe did years ago that caused a lot of genealogists to get really angry, and that was limiting DNA matches to only 1,500 matches. And I'm guessing that a lot of people who aren't into genetic genealogy are saying, what? 1,500 matches is too little? What are you talking about? And while I can understand that sentiment, it's unfortunately not understanding that you may have matches that are such low amounts of matches in terms of how much DNA you share, but could be the people that help solve a mystery. And that's going to be, your match number, 3,000 or something like that, or match number 10,000, or, on Ancestry DNA, I have a lot of DNA kits that have hundreds of thousands of DNA matches. So if I only get 1,500 matches, that means I have tens of thousands of matches that I no longer have access to. And that can also be misleading, because if you are trying to solve a genealogical question and get someone to do a target test, basically you're expecting that person to come up as a match in some amount. If you do that and they're just beyond that 1,500 threshold just because the amount is so little, it may seem like they aren't matching at all, when in reality, they're just matching at a small amount. Now, there are ways around this by doing third-party websites like GEDmatch. It's one of those things that it's like, well, now you're adding a whole bunch of steps into what I have to do to be able to figure some of this out, because now I have to upload my kit to GEDmatch, which I suggest everyone does anyway. But then that also means that when you get people to test on 23andMe, you also need to get them to test or upload that to GEDmatch. And it's hard enough to get people to do a DNA test, let alone to then have them follow up and download raw data and upload it themselves, or send it to you, or get you the access. It's just, a lot of people are not the most comfortable with that sometimes, but on top of that, a lot of people just don't care as much. And, there's been a lot of people that I've had do DNA testing for me where it's taken me a long time to be able to get access to it, just because I'm like hitting them up like, hey, can you help me out and get the access? Oh, yeah, when I have time. And it's like, on the back of their list. I think I'm starting to ramble now, so let's continue.
19. Sales from those kits started falling significantly for the first time, and a big theory going around was that most of the people who had interest in the test had taken it already. And trust me, it was a concern well before that as well. Around 2010, when they were trying to reduce that price point to make it more accessible, they experimented with required subscriptions to go along with your initial purchase. Like, when they first started charging $99 for the test, you would only be able to get that price if you agreed to a year-long $9 per month subscription, where you would receive updates about discoveries in the community specific to your DNA. That specific structure did not last long, but in 2020, they introduced a new yearly subscription.
This is what I was talking about that got so many people angry with 23andMe. Just another notch in the road of 23andMe angering the genealogy community. And this was a big one. I can't remember if 23andMe Plus came out at the same time that they limited the matches to 1,500, but I want to say that it was about that same time.
For a premium service that offers additional reports and advanced features. Again, a respectable attempt to maintain their customers and keep them engaged, but it just hasn't been enough. Their latest reports show that they are losing subscribers, and it only accounts for a small portion of the revenue anyway. That is going to lead me into the next reason on my list, and that is the health value of their tests. Because it is essentially a two-part test. Part of it focuses on ancestry and ethnicity, while the other part focuses on your health. Well, there are multiple aspects to it, but mainly they look at your DNA and determine if you are genetically at risk for various health conditions. And overall, I would say that has been the greater focus for 23andMe. They've actually had a lot of issues in doing it, specifically with the FDA.
Yeah.
In 2010, the FDA made a rule saying that any services evaluating someone's risk of disease, much like the service 23andMe provides, must be approved before they can sell it. Well, they continued on selling it for a while without approval, so in 2013, the FDA sent them a warning about it. They were forced to stop generating the health-related reports in the US and provide only the Ancestry ones.
Basically, the health data, all you have to do is find out what specific SNPs are they looking for as the variants associated with certain diseases. And then you just look in your raw data, find that SNP, and you see, okay, the SNP that they say is associated with that variant is the A. That's what I have at that spot, so I have that variant, so that puts me at a higher risk of getting whatever this is. So that's kind of the basic idea behind doing these health-related tests. But one of the things that is very important for a lot of people that do these tests for that reason is you can't take these tests for their word exactly. You can take them as a helpful indication, but if you do the test and it says you have no variance associated with, a higher risk of having this or that or whatever, it doesn't mean that you have no risk. And then in the same side, if it says that you do have a much higher risk, it doesn't mean that you are going to have that issue. But what I often tell people is that if you do see variants detected for something that does worry you, then the best thing to do is go speak to a genetic counselor, a doctor, or someone that, does proper health genetic testing to look at that properly in a proper health setting. I think that was one of the things that was pushing the FDA to have these issues. I don't know how long it was, but it felt like it was like a few years where 23andMe basically there was no health stuff. You had the traits, like it could be fun stuff like, how likely would you have red hair and how likely freckles and the, smelling asparagus in your pee thing and, all the fun stuff people do in these YouTube videos when they see the traits. But if it was a health-related thing, I don't think they could, but eventually they were able to bring that back. And then, of course, Ancestry ended up rolling out their own health thing as well, which I don't remember when Ancestry rolled out DNA tests because they were one of the ones that was a little bit later on, but I want to say by 2013, that was when Ancestry first started getting into the DNA game. And because they were already such a large company, they just instantly took a huge stakehold in the field.
By 2019, they fully shifted their marketing to center on the health aspects over the ancestry aspects.
And the genealogy community felt that greatly, just like I've been talking about. And I really think that that was something where if they had just worked to try to figure out something that truly would captivate the genealogy community, they really could have kept being a, large force in the DNA field. But at this point, they're kind of just dragging along in their spot because their database was just so large compared to the other companies except for Ancestry, that it's kind of just like, because they got such a big lead in the beginning, that they've just kind of held as doing okay. Obviously, with all these other issues going on with the board leaving all of that, the company stuff, that's a major problem. But I guess just in general of a viewpoint of genealogy of what DNA test would people suggest, a large part of that has to do with how large is the database. And that's why a lot of people in general, for many years, not quite as much now, would always say either test at Ancestry or 23andMe or both as kind of the main ones to test at, and then upload to the other DNA tests. So, yeah.
Probably a smart decision considering that their main competitor, Ancestry.com, obviously focuses more on Ancestry. They even discontinued their short-lived Ancestry health service, helping place more of a distinction between the two. Also, in 2021, I want to mention that 23andMe paid $400 million to buy a telehealth company called Lemonade, so we can see how they have progressed into much more of a health-based company, and there's been a lot of risk associated with that. It is going to lead me right into the next reason on my list that I'm going to call entertainment. I think that there is a big divide between the company and its customers, because to me, it looks like 23andMe wants to be a serious, important different company that helps treat people or even save their lives with genetic information. Like, if someone learns that they have a genetically high risk of heart disease, 23andMe wants that person to talk to their doctor about how to prevent it, look into how their medications can affect it, alter their diet based on it, get additional reports. Just take that information as a serious part of their health plan. I mean, they have spent a lot of money on FDA approvals and acquisitions and everything else to become more medically trusted, while most of their customers, I believe, seem to view it as more of a source of entertainment. They take the test because it'll be fun to learn about their genetics and don't have any real plans to alter their lifestyle based on those results.
I definitely agree with that sentiment. But once again, I think just the biggest part that he's not really thinking about, maybe necessarily, maybe I'm overthinking it because I am a genealogist, but I do feel like the genealogy community really does have a huge impact in all of this. And the fact that they have not only avoided catering to the genealogy community, but have done things to detract from the genealogy community's ability to utilize the website, that has been a major issue, because I think he's right. Most of the people that are doing this test, they're doing it for fun. But a large amount of them were being pushed to do the DNA test because of their family members who were genealogists. And it's the genealogists who then make the utilization of the actual database and are the ones that would keep coming back for things that 23andMe could provide. What that is, I don't know, because if they were to try to even, get into the space of what Ancestry MyHeritage does with records and all of that, they have a long way to get into that. But I think that years ago, they had the opportunity to do that when they made the choice to focus on the medical side of things. And had they instead tried to focus on the ancestry and genealogy side of things, I think that might have given them a better edge.
Final reason on my list is privacy concerns. Unfortunately, there are so many layers to this, but at the core, I think people are uneasy with having their genetic information out there. In 2019, remember when sales started falling significantly for the first time, and Wojcicki theorized that a big part of it was due to privacy concerns. And still today, now that the company is likely going to be changing owners, people that have taken the test before are concerned about what is going to happen to all that genetic data that they have accumulated. Who is going to have access to it? What are they going to do with it? And are the laws strict enough to keep everything protected? Because I guess the specific data is not protected by HIPAA that would protect it in a more traditional medical setting.
Now, obviously, the privacy issues are something that keeps people from all of the different DNA testing companies. This isn't unique to 23andMe, obviously, but I know that a big part of why 2019 we saw a big downturn of people testing had to do with the announcement in 2018 of the Golden State Killer case being solved with investigative genetic genealogy, as well as all of the subsequent announcements of genetic genealogy, investigative genetic genealogy being used to solve various Doe cases and other crimes. And that caused a lot of issues for various reasons. And a big part of that had to do with when they were first doing it, the companies didn't know about it. So the companies that allowed uploads to the site had these DNA tests in it that were being compared that they didn't realize were from crime scenes. I don't know if they were able to get into Ancestry or 23andMe, because to be able to do that, they have to send in a sample using one of their kits. So they would have had to make it look like a regular kit if they did that. So I doubt that was the case. It's certainly possible. But once all of that came out, people just were worried about doing the DNA test, because now it wasn't just a worry of, well, who's going to get a hold of the data? Now it was, well, the government now has a hold of the data, because that's how people saw it. Having worked as an investigative genetic genealogist for almost 5 years, I know that that's not the case. It's most people aren't really getting access to these databases that are working on this stuff nowadays. And especially nowadays, it's only limited to family tree DNA and to GEDmatch, where you can search for criminal cases. So MyHeritage, 23andMe, Ancestry, all of those are completely out for investigative genetic genealogy, so people don't have to worry about that. But one thing I always talk about when this discussion comes up is, while I understand a lot of people's worries about, giving out their genetic data, the real truth about it is that if somebody wanted to get your DNA, it probably wouldn't be that difficult. If you are someone who makes sure that everything you throw out gets completely incinerated and there's no way that people would be able to find your DNA, then you're good. But otherwise, all someone has to do is wait until you go to a restaurant and you drink your drink. They walk up and take the cup, take the straw, whatever, take the fork. You smoke a cigarette, you throw it out, they go grab the cigarette, spitting on the ground, and then you go away and they go and they get the spit from the ground or whatever, they can get your DNA. And this is something that police do all the time, law enforcement do all the time. It's what's known as surreptitious samples. So basically what they're doing is they're just going and getting a DNA sample from someone where they do not realize that their DNA is getting sampled. And then to talk about the medical side of things, well, HIPAA doesn't really protect you with these DNA tests. What does protect you is what's known as the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, which is also nicknamed GINA. And that's a law, at least in the United States. So this only applies to people in the US. It may be different in different countries. I don't know what the laws are in various countries. And that law helps protect people who do DNA testing from having insurance companies or employers or others discriminate you based on your DNA. So basically, a lot of people worry about, if I do a DNA test and then it says I have a higher chance of Alzheimer's, does that mean that all of a sudden they're going to be like, well, your insurance is now 10 times more expensive because you have a higher likelihood? They can't do that because that law. Granted, it's a law and laws can always be changed, so who knows what could happen in the future, but just a realistic standpoint with it.
On top of all of those concerns, 23andMe had a data breach in 2023 that exposed all sorts of account information from 6.9 million users, which was almost half of them. I am talking about locations, birth dates, ancestry reports, and a bunch of other information. The company said that they incurred $2.7 million in expenses directly related to it, and in 2024, there was a $30 million settlement connected to it.
Now, this is all very interesting what he's talking about, because what happened here, from my understanding, was that this was a stuffing attack. I believe that's what it's called. I could be wrong in that. A lot of this information I'm getting was based on Mudahar Ordinary Gamers video. And basically, he looked into it and found that it was largely a stuffing attack, which basically meant that these people got a whole database of emails and associated passwords, and then went into 23andMe and tried those emails and passwords. And if they worked, they were able to go in and get this information. Now, knowing what's in a 23andMe profile, I really don't think there's going to be a ton in there that's going to be useful. And for most people, the stuff that they have in those profiles is going to be stuff that you're going to find in general searches outside of 23andMe. Now, I think a lot of people worry because it's like, oh my God, the DNA, the raw data. But if you're anyone who's done genetic genealogy or genetic testing or anything like that, you know how complicated it is to figure anything like this out. And while people could utilize this in some sort of nefarious way if they wanted to figure out who has what possible diseases and things like that, I guess technically they could, but I think the biggest thing that anyone would have gotten out of the website wouldn't have really even been the genetic data. It would have more just been the actual like addresses and more specific identifying information that would have just been a general account information. Now, this is obviously my opinion based on my understanding of what happened, and I highly recommend people check out Mudahar's video about it because I thought it was a really good deep dive, especially for someone who I know, Mudahar does not want to do DNA testing. I think he doesn't necessarily look down on it, but from my feeling was he just sees it as like, not for me, no thank you, too much risk with it. And even with that mindset, I felt like he came at it with such a good understanding of, the nuances of everything. So yeah. But with all that said, still kind of interesting how much money and all of this different stuff that happened because of that, when from my understanding, it was a stuffing attack that basically can happen to any website. There's nothing they can really do against that I don't know. But maybe I'm wrong. People comment below if you know a little bit more of what happened. I honestly, never looked too much deeper into it or anything like that once things kind of settled a bit.
In conclusion, 23andMe is a mess. Something that started out so promising has quickly become a negative subject. I'm curious to hear if you have taken the test before and if you felt that your results were meaningful in some way. Overall, I'm sure that at least some of those 15 million customers have benefited by knowing more about their genetic makeup. But on the other hand, a lot of money has been lost, a lot of private information has has been leaked, and as of right now, there's almost no tangible reason to believe that this company will ever be sustainable. I am just saying, if this video somehow made you want to get this particular test done, it might just be a now or never type situation for 23andMe. Also, I just want to make it clear that these are simply the reasons that I felt were the most impactful in the decline of the company.
That was a really good video, and I kind of do want to address that last mention that he was talking about of, do you believe there's any use in it, and have you gotten any use out of it? And I do believe there's a use in it, and there's a use still for people who want to get use out of it in the last, cries of it as it goes down. But basically, 23andMe has people who've done DNA testing only in 23andMe. And for someone who's doing genetic genealogy and looking for their family members, if the family member who is the key to unlocking whatever you're trying to solve only tested in 23andMe and 23andMe is no longer around, then you no longer have access to that. You just have to hope that that person tests somewhere else. But because 23andMe has been around for so long, there are a lot of people in 23andMe who are only in 23andMe and will never be anywhere else because they have since passed away. And this is one of the biggest reasons why if anyone wants to do a 23andMe kit, now they should. And to add on to that, anyone who is already on 23andMe and wants to keep their data for future use, snapshot as much of it as you can. The biggest thing obviously being the matches, their names and all of that, and the shared matches on there. And, I could go on and on about what specific stuff to get, but if you are really into genetic genealogy and you're on 23andMe, snapshot it now before it goes away, because once that data is gone, if it does go away and we no longer have access to it, then that's it. And they used to have it where I think you could download your matches as a CSV file and you could download other stuff along with your raw data. I don't know if they can do that anymore because after that whole hacking thing, they took a lot of stuff away. So they used to have what was known as a chromosome browser, something that genetic genealogists use to do what's known as DNA painting. Basically, you can figure out what segments of your DNA based on who you're matching is coming from what ancestor. So, if you're matching a second cousin and you share this set of great-grandparents, well, then you know that that DNA is coming from your grandparent who's the child of those great-grandparents. And then you can associate any other DNA matches that match on that same segment to possibly that same family. And so that was really important in DNA testing, and one of the things they took away that made it such less of a useful website. But I can definitely say that I have gotten a lot of use out of 23andMe because there have been many matches in 23andMe that have helped me solve various family mysteries, as well as helping others solve their family mysteries who were connected to me. So I think the biggest one that I found after the first test at 23andMe, which actually my first experience with 23andMe wasn't through my own test, it was through family members who I got to test on there because I was like, oh, you should test here, test here, test here. So I had them test there and I tested there years later. But once I had family members test there, I instantly found some matches who were completely from a Christian family as they knew it, but then they had this 12 some odd % Jewish. Well, I'm only Jewish ancestry, so they had to be related to me through whatever that line that was. And then through the research, I was able to figure out that they likely descended from my great-grandfather's brother. And we never thought he had any kids. And then we found a whole nother family who also was matching in the same exact way and had the same exact thing going on. And then it turned out that they were pretty much descendants of that same brother. So he had 2 children out of wedlock, and we only found that out because I had family members test on 23andMe, and had they never done that, we probably would have figured it out eventually because a lot of those same family members tested on Ancestry, and we would have figured it out then. But still, if I had only tested on 23andMe, we would have been able to find that out. And so that's the kind of stuff that you can find out. You can basically uncover the skeletons in your closet, which a warning as well is that that can be an issue for some people because you do a DNA test and all of a sudden you might find out that maybe your parents aren't really your biological parents, or your dad isn't your biological dad, or grandpa wasn't the biological grandpa, or, maybe your sibling wasn't really your full sibling and is only a half sibling, or, there's all these various things you might find out that aren't too pretty and true skeletons in the closet. But overall, this was such a good video, such a great cover of it, and hopefully this is something that a lot of people enjoyed, because I did get a lot of people asking me to talk about the whole 23andMe issue, and while I have a lot of opinions about it and all that, I don't know a lot of the in-depth stuff with the company, so I think this added kind of a lot of great places for me to add into. And if you enjoyed this reaction and would like to see more reactions of mine, be sure to check out this one right here. Thank you to my Patreon patrons and YouTube members.